Well, 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 look who it is. That's right, it's you, and you've tuned in to the Super Show podcast, episode number 175. I'm your host for this week, Jamie, and joining me, as ever, with his swooshing, windswept hair and his Clark Kent glasses, Mr. Alex Jones. How are you, sir?
I am very good. Thank you for having me, for joining me on this wonderful Monday for another
My
live
pleasure.
episode of the Super Show.
It's weird. I wasn't sure what I was going to describe about your look today when I was throwing it over to you. And then it's one of those things, when you see someone's face at least once a week for well, I'd say 10 years now, 10 years plus, as we have one another, sometimes you're just like, okay, I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to make an observation about it. And your hair's looking very luscious today. That's what I wanted to say.
I thank you. Do you know what feel like I need an opinion. Okay, so I want to cut the hair because the hair is too long. It is epic. Look at this. If I do this, look how long that is. I'm not far from 40 now, right? And I
Oh,
constantly see people talking online about like losing their hair and stuff, and guys have a real thing about losing their hair. My dad is he's almost 65. He's still got quite a good head of hair on him. So I'm like, should I take advantage and keep the hair? Should I be leaning into the hair and like let it grow? Because I
right.
can, or just keep cutting it like I normally would. This is the question.
Uh, I'd say just kind of like don't treat it like it's something that's going to necessarily go and just kind of keep living your life. But then again, we also, I don't know if you remember who this is without me having to name them and dox them, but we worked with someone back in the day who I think reached a point in their life where they were worried they might lose their hair and so intentionally grew it out to almost, not to counteract it, but to have the experience of having long hair once in their life. And I think they actually liked it enough they kept it for at least a little while.
I
A
don't know.
fellow editor of ours who spent some time down under
Oh,
or thereabouts.
oh, was he worried
Yeah.
about losing it?
I don't think
Okay.
he was worried about. I think he just got to that point where he was like, "Do you know what? I'm in my mid-30s. I might not be able to grow my hair when I want to in the future, so I'm going to do it now."
So kind of what I'm thinking now is like,
Yeah.
should I be trimming it off? I don't think it's going to like disappear anytime soon, but there's always the opportunity. Maybe I should be going, no, I'm going to have an illustrious head of hair, but I won't. I'm going to cut it. It's because it's too hot. It's so annoying.
There's that too. Yeah. Plus, I think you're one. This just sounds like the Alex Jones flattery hour. I apologise, Jonesy, for putting you on the spot this early on, but I think you can pull off kind of short and medium length hair.
Thank you, sir.
So just roll with it. And I remember seeing your dad on that one live stream you did where you tried to land a plane in Flight Simulator with a real life pilot sat opposite you,
Yeah.
and you screwed it off the runway. And if you're in that shape in your mid-60s, then you've got nothing to worry about.
He, a video game adjacent, he did his last sim the other day.
Really?
Yeah, so I think it's probably the same world over. When you get to 65, you can't be a pilot anymore, like a commercial
Oh,
pilot. You won't get a medical basically, so like you have to stop.
gotcha.
I think there are some routes you can, but you can't fly like people commercially. So yeah, he said he's done his last ever sim because they do them every
Oh.
6 months, and so yeah, he'll be 65 before he'd need to do another. So
Well,
sad times for me old dad.
yeah, sad times, but congrats to him in a way, I guess. Making it a full career in flying, in piloting, and unscathed.
I'll have to get him Game Pass so he can play Microsoft Flight Simulator.
I mean, I feel like there have been people who have done that transition in the past and become like wildly. There must be someone out there who went from train conductor to train simulator streamer and is just raking in money. I don't know where they are. They're probably German.
I've watched The Sims. Would you call it like the sim? Would they call it Sims? Like where they pretend to be the actual things, and it's like a simulation as opposed to like playing the game on Microsoft Flight Simulator, and they take it
Yeah,
so seriously. And there's people who are being the flight control tower people.
yeah, I've seen some of that stuff. Yeah,
That blows me away because they've never done it professionally, but they're like so good at, and they just sit there for hours in game landing
yeah.
planes.
I'm sure I watched a compilation at some point of like pilots arguing with like the what are they called? The people that sit in the tower that tell you if you can or can't land.
Yeah, like isn't it flight
Flight
controllers? Flight
Is it
controllers,
just
isn't
flight
it?
control? I feel like there's but whatever it was, I feel like I saw them arguing once.
But
Like
air traffic controllers is the other
air
thing. Yeah.
traffic control. Air traffic was the term I was trying to remember. But you know what, Jonesy? Going back to the hair, it's an open forum. We make that choice when we decide to record this podcast, but I also actually broadcast out live on YouTube. And that means while we are technically here to give our opinions and our hot takes on video games, the people are just as capable, should they desire, to leave their hot takes on anything about us, which I'm not going to say should exclusively be about our appearance, but if there are thoughts or suggestions they have, fashion advice, hair tips, grooming, words of wisdom, then the kind of the hair grooming.
Not the
Let's
other.
keep it PG here, folks. Then they can do so in all kinds of places. Like I said, we're on YouTube. You can head over there, watch the VOD of this, or even catch the live stream if you're in time, because we do go live every Monday evening in the UK. You can leave a comment in the comment section, or if you make it to that live stream in time, you can join in the chat. I'm sure Jonesy's keeping a keen eye on it already. We'll check in on that crew in just a moment. But I would also like to say that we are available on certain social media websites like X. So if you want to let Jonesy know what you think about his hair, you can let him know at SuperShow Pod is the handle over there. And of course, we are available on major podcasting platforms, places like Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts. You can head over there. You can get the audio version of this very product. You can leave a 5-star review, even if you feel so inclined, and you would be a welcome and celebrated member of the Super Show community. We thank you for your engagement. And Jonesy, we touched on it. The live stream folks, have we got a couple of names helping us hold down the fort this evening?
I've got one for you today. It's pretty quiet in the chat. It's Jack Martinka. Shout out to Jack, who says,
Wow,
glad
shout
to
out
see
to
you
Jack.
guys live.
Glad to be live.
Yeah, absolutely. I like going live. I like knowing that people are watching. We've got a few other people watching who are just lurking at the moment, which is all good as well. We love a lurker. I've been one many times.
I am one most of the time. It's like I'm not going to say I'm like a record setter when it comes to the ratio of Twitch viewership to lack of commenting, but I must have Twitch on for like tens of hours a month, which again is probably paltry compared to the people who are obsessed. But I never type in anyone's chat. That's just not my thing. It moves too fast, and I don't understand emojis anymore. That's my old person thing.
I love that you said that, because I feel like that, and the fact that you feel like that, and you're younger than me, and you're more with it than I am, means that I don't feel as bad. I like it when I go and see people who are smaller streamers. Like I like to watch Robin from the Just Interesting guys that he streams sometimes, because there's maybe like maybe like 10, 12 people chatting, and it's a lot more manageable. And the memeage isn't as high, and the emoji use is not as high either. So I feel like I can interact.
Yeah. Well, it's like I feel like we all sign this like unseeable, unknowable contract, this invisible contract with each other. Well, when we step into the digital frontier and engage with other people online, occasionally there are going to be learning experiences along the way, and whether that's like vocabulary that we need to learn or acronyms that we need to learn, and but the goalposts are always moving. And that's why you get people now who are probably in their 60s who think they're hip and trendy for knowing what OMG stands for. For us, like, there was a bit of a shift when emojis in the mobile world got not just accepted, but ultimately integrated into operating systems like iOS, where now you can, respond to a fucking paragraph of text with a thumbs up, and people aren't offended. It's just like, that's common nomenclature for some people. Where it gets weird is because there's so much room for custom emojis or emoticons or whatever you call them on Twitch. Like when you get into Kek W and Monka S, and I'm like, especially just hearing those things said out loud, I'm like, okay, that's probably an image of a frog, and he's probably pulling a face, but I don't know what that face is yet. I'm still learning.
Yeah, absolutely. But there you go. It's all a learning experience, isn't it?
Yeah, we promise we'll get there eventually, folks. If we ever venture back onto Twitch, we'll have a full set of custom reactions that you can spew, and it's all just be that various faces the frog pulls, but it'll be Jonesy.
We just got an emoji, a little thumbs up from Jamie McCarroll in the chat. So there you go. He's
see again. They say as picture speaks 1,000 words. I'm sure at the time they were talking about grand tapestries and fucking all when they painted the entire ceilings of buildings. Nowadays, that refers to thumbs up and hearts.
Do you get this? So our work stuff, when we don't really use email, we use chat, like to speak to people. But you'll get like a thing from HR where they'll say something to you, and then you'll like reply in chat, and then they'll just do like a love heart because they're or a
Yeah.
like. I don't like that. I'm like, no, I don't know you. We've only
Mm.
conversed like online digitally maybe a couple of times. I'm not quite sure we're the love heart in the reply to the
Yeah.
chat yet. Bit weird.
Especially if it's from HR. I feel like HR are the one
Not
department that
anyone, like any department, but HR
okay.
over. I have had one from HR, but I get it, like because I do it as well. I'll do like a thumbs up, but when it's and I get what they mean. It's usually like a female HR, not just HR. I keep saying HR, like a female member of staff will do like a love heart because I know they just mean like great, love this, but it's still just a
Yeah.
bit random. It's like getting a kiss on a
Oh,
message from your boss or something, and you're like,
yeah.
yeah, bit
I
weird.
got a sunflower earlier, which I think
Sunflower.
is a yeah. Well, it might just have been a regular flower, but it looked like a sunflower from a distance, and I presume that's just a positive thing. Like, yeah, sounds great, cool. Here's a sunflower. But I, you see, this is the thing. We need to kind of like bridge the gap sometimes between, because we don't know exactly what that person is trying to say, but we just have to interpret it as best we can. It's like sign language,
Mate,
except far
Freud.
less sophisticated.
Freud would have a hell of a time in this day and age because he would be making all sorts of hay about what the sunflower means.
Yeah, I mean, there's a chance that he'd have a field day trying to interpret emojis, but there's also a chance, given just the statistical probabilities of various outcomes, that he'd be too busy playing video games like Baldur's Gate 3 to give a shit, Jonesy. Because that is supposedly what most of planet fucking Earth is doing.
I'm doing you the fire emoji because that was a fire transition.
Oh, see, I can now that you called it a fire, I can see it. But for anyone that doesn't have the video version of this podcast in front of them, Jonesy just started wiggling four fingers in front of me, which most people would still just interpret as you were trying to communicate the number four for some reason.
Yeah, maybe.
Um, do you know what? I won't read into it too much. Not everything has to have a double meaning. But yeah, he probably would be playing Baldur's Gate 3 because, as I said, most people on planet Earth appear to be. In fact, sometimes it feels like the only two people not are the two people who have chosen to sat here tonight and talk to you about it, which is myself and Jonesy. So that's the early heads up that you're going to get on this one, that we are venturing in from we're taking a step back. We're taking, we're looking at the third person perspective of Baldur's Gate 3, what it's like to be someone who isn't a part of one of the biggest video game zeitgeists of the year. A zeitgeist caused initially by what was a slowly creeping and increasing Metacritic rating, Jonesy, which has now landed at 97. That makes it the highest rated game of the year, I think. Was it?
It does, yeah.
It was Tears of the Kingdom was the other one in the running. Am I right in thinking that?
Yes, and it's just gone ahead of Tears of the Kingdom now.
There you go. Different story over on Open Critic though, because there it has become the highest rated game of all time, which is, I mean, look, let's be real, it's pretty good. I think if you were going to set a target for your hot new video game, that's not a bad target to aim for. But Josie, the other thing to talk about is the number of people playing it. Currently second place on Steam's most played games with 650,000 players. What's I think really impressive is that the number of concurrent players appears to be sometimes like going up. Like I can't remember the exact numbers, but it looked like the concurrent players were higher in week 2 than they were at points in week 1. So this is kind of this slowly growing behemoth that at one point sort of like stumbled its way into the top 10 for kind of record concurrent players and is now, as we said, in contention for, I think it's really just Hogwarts Legacy that's standing in the way at the moment of this being one of the biggest video game events of all time, which I don't know that anyone saw coming a few months ago.
I was absolutely baffled by this. So I think I think there was a point in the week when over a 24-hour period, I'm pretty sure that 25% of all concurrent players on Steam were playing Baldur's Gate 3, and it was the biggest game on there for 24 hours. I think because I think CS:GO is basically always the top of that list.
Right.
Always has the most, and I believe that Baldur's Gate actually got ahead of it at one point. But no, I'm with you. Like we were talking about this game for quite a while. I actually joked to you that I know someone who worked on it, and I hadn't really thought about it that much. Because we said, oh, it'd be cool to actually speak to them about it. And I thought, oh, well, Baldur's Gate 3, not really my cup of tea, probably won't bother. And then now it's gone absolutely stratospheric. And now I'm feeling a bit stupid. Could have got a little bit of an insight into that whole development process and didn't. So
Yeah.
there you go.
Stupid, and also inevitably with these kind of things, a little bit left out, right? Like you just want you want to have a you want to have a take.
So do you want to know I think my closest point at which I've come to knowing what it's like to play Baldur's Gate 3 is probably the tabletop RPG that you, me, and Chris did when in the ATG days, and we played some D&D adjacent tabletop RPG. Well, I can't remember what it's called. The Summoner, I believe. We sort of made
Oh
our
yeah,
own.
well, no, it's
Yeah,
a series of books because
it
that
is a
was
series of books.
a sponsored video.
But it was the closest I've come to like Dungeons and Dragons and like proper RPGs. And this, by all measures, apparently seems like it does a really good job of capturing tabletop RPGs in game form rather than just pretending you can attack things from different directions. It seems that people are actually really enjoying the fact that this game allows you to have that freedom and to actually play a game the way an RPG should be played.
Yeah, especially because I feel like you and I can be a little bit set in our ways sometimes in terms of the kind of games, not necessarily the kind of games we don't want to play. Oftentimes, the kind of games, no, excuse me, not necessarily the kind of games we do want to play, but sometimes the kind of games we don't want to play. Like I joked with some guys in our Discord earlier in the week that like there's a Limmy clip that I like from when people were trying to get him to play Baldur's Gate 3, where he sees the numbers in the trailer in a review he's watching. I think he's watching ACG's review, and he goes, like, oh fuck numbers, and like just closes the tab immediately. He's like, I'm playing Dead by Daylight, which is not what I would resort to. I don't, Dead by Daylight. That's to each their own, right?
But
Yeah,
I'm with him. The numbers thing, I'm like, I'm like numbers coming out of heads, don't like that. Numbers on cards,
sure.
cards in games, don't like
And there
that.
are numbers, but there is a flip side here, and this is the flip side that eventually got me to try, and I know eventually got you to try Disco Elysium, and that was a game that worked for both of us, which is that, okay, like, this many people can't be wrong when it comes to Baldur's Gate's ability to capture the true open-endedness and variety of choice and, like, story impact and so on and so every outcome and eventuality that tabletop RPGs traditionally offer. Because I know it's a bit lame to say something cliche like the only limit in a tabletop RPG is theoretically the imaginations of yourself and the people around you. But like a game that gets closer than any game has before to that promise is appealing, no? Numbers aside.
It's ironic because I'm completely with you. Disco Elysium was a game that I wasn't interested in. And then I believe it was you talking about it and having such a good time with it. And I know Steph really liked it as well, I believe. And I tried it and then I really enjoyed it. Ended up finishing the entire game. And I ended up, my only criticism of that game ended up being that I wanted more variety in what I could do because I actually got to a point, I think I was right at the end of the game. And I was like, oh, can I actually do things in more ways? Or is it just trying to give me the illusion? And it was definitely just trying to give you the illusion. There was one way. You could end up with certain people. I think you could, like, someone could be dead who's not, kind of thing. But at the
Sure.
end of the game, but you couldn't actually have avoided a situation. Like you're always going to end up at the same point. You always had to end up doing a certain thing. But yeah, no, I'm keen to sort of have a play of a game that really does give you the option to maybe don't have to fight. You can go in there and you can negotiate, or you can go and do, attack it in multiple different ways. Which Cyberpunk said that it was going to be that kind of game, and then kind of wasn't. There was even a time when Dying Light 2 said that it was going to be that kind of game, but less of the RPG-ness. But it wasn't. They became much more linear.
Yeah.
In how you kind of approach things. So no, I think I want to play this game, Jamie, which kind of weirds me out a bit because I never thought
I'm getting
that.
there as well. And there's even co-op, right? So like, if you and I did decide to play it, we could theoretically play it together. Which again, like that's just one extra level to this experience that sounds from the outside looking in like almost incompatible with the degree of freedom and choice that the game offers you. But like, fair play to them for making sure that was a fundamental to their gameplay mechanics. I also love that it's and I wonder if you've got a take on this. It's reignited the save scum debate. Have you seen this on Twitter?
I can no, but is it the idea that before you do a roll or a decision you save and then you can reload and redo it?
Yeah.
You don't get it. Yeah, no,
And
I don't like it. I'm not a fan of.
But how
save
do you feel
scums.
about other? Because I guess everyone's got their own opinion on it and whether or not they would do it. The thing that kind of ignites the debate is that some people argue that a game like Baldur's Gate 3 is a game where you should actually indulge or revel in things going wrong, because things going wrong often leads to more interesting or funny or out there outcomes. And so rather than just like save scumming every time you don't get the die roll you're looking for, you should actually embrace it and see how the game reacts and how the story responds to something, in inverted commas, going wrong, but actually for the sake of the story might be more entertaining.
Yeah, no, I have no problem with other people doing it if they want to. Like, I'm not going to watch you stream a game if you're doing it, because it's not how I'd want to play, and I don't think it's the best way to do it. But I'm not going to say you shouldn't do it. But yeah, and if you, I don't think it's like cheating or anything. Like, if they really wanted you to not be able to do it, they could have implemented things in the game to stop you doing it. But we've all been there to some degree. Like, I wouldn't play an RPG like that. However, have I saved a game at a choice moment because I knew that there was a possibility of a bad outcome? Yes, I have done that before.
Yep. Yep.
So I'm not going to say that I'm completely perfect when it comes to that.
Yeah. Even just cheats, right? Like you might rock up to a friend's house one day and they're playing a From Software game with a trainer in the background that's got the giving them infinite health. And most of us, even myself, as not a huge fan of the genre, would sort of sit there going like, "Huh, okay, like that's a choice, like to engage with these games in such a way, but that's also your choice." And like, I
As a
guess you can't,
FromSoft game, I would say a fine, bit weird, but fine. And when you told me you'd finished like Demon Souls, I'd be like, no, you haven't. You've not, no, you haven't. But
yeah, well, yeah.
if it was an online game, like if I rocked up and someone's playing Warzone and they've got like wall hacking on or
Oh,
something, I would like, if I came to your house and you were wall hacking on Warzone, I would be livid for one, because I would be like, that's why you're so much better than me. And then I would also be really annoyed. I'd start to get like fire and brimstone about how it's unfair to all the other people online and how you're ruining it for other people. Yeah, if it was an online game, I'd be a bit like that.
Oh no, yeah, that's a very important distinction. You're absolutely right, and like that's, I think I'll stand with you on that unequivocally. That like cheating in competitive or PvP multiplayer games to give yourself an advantage and ruin the experience for other people is going to be frowned upon in almost every scenario imaginable. So don't do it. Not least of all because you'll probably also get banned or something like that, and then you lose your. I cheated in a single player game the other day. But it was one of these games that has a constant server-side connection, and I don't even want to know. I'm like talking. Basically, I play FIFA sometimes on my computer, and I know there's lots of multiplayer components in FIFA, but I strictly play the career mode, which is a entirely single-player, entirely offline, experience. But I use an editor to kind of like change stats and like make certain things happen in more interesting ways. But because I'm like messing around with a game that has such a big online proponent and has anti-cheat and all this kind of stuff, all the things when you're downloading and installing certain tables and whatnot are like, yeah, you might get banned for this, please be careful. And it scares the shit out of me every time.
Is it okay? Is it worth it then on a game like that? Like, does it make that much of a difference to how you play that it's worth getting banned, or like you're just not that
Probably not. Yeah, it's probably not worth it, and yeah, it's kind of that I'm not that bothered, and that I don't know. Put it this way: like there are some really bad things that happen, like in terms of cheating and in other regards when it comes to online components of games like FIFA. I always just think that if they've gotten to the point where they're banning a user for like altering a database entry in the single player career mode of a game, then it's like, did you really have nothing better to do? I know you have something better to do. Please go and do that. Like,
yeah, to me that's not cheating. If you've got something running on your local system and then they've added in always online aspects to it, I'm like, well, that's your own fault. Like, it wasn't like you were going to mess with the online component. You were going to do anything dodgy online anyway. They didn't have to make that part always online. So, yeah,
I think it's just like it's anti-cheat is what you got to be careful of, right? Like if it's if there's some kind of software like running in the background or as a part of the game program itself that is constantly monitoring for external or third-party applications that it doesn't like the look of, then I understand I might fall foul of that. But that's the risk I take to edit the potential overalls of youth products from Chile in my FIFA career modes, okay? And that's my right.
It's the way I used to play GTA 3 was I used to play I'd play it properly for like a couple of hours, and then I would put in like all the cheats to then just go mental.
Oh yeah.
I would save it as we were just saying, and then I would
Yep.
put in every cheat, go mental for like half an hour, then turn it off, and then when I came back, I'd play it properly again for a couple of hours, do exactly the same thing again.
Oh yeah, I feel like the grand tradition of cheating in GTA, if you grew up in a certain era, that's like ingrained in some people's brains. And if you don't have like the cheat for full health, max armor, and max ammo or whatever like ingrained in your brain, you probably had it written down on like a piece of paper that you folded up and put in the box, or on the back empty page of like a cheat book that you got from a PlayStation magazine. Like we've all been there.
I still
Um,
the only I can still remember the cheat from Hitman One. I think it was
right. Okay.
for I can't remember what it even does. Maybe it's like infinite health or like all the weapons, but it's Kimbo Kastiknev. I still remember that to
Oh
this day.
wow, that's a
I
that's a
don't
weird
know
one to
why I
remember.
still remember. But that's what it
Yeah,
was.
I suppose it's one of those things that if you type out a lot, it's so unique, it probably would stick in your brain. The
Yes.
the
Yeah, yeah,
GT,
maybe, yeah.
the GTA ones I remember were famous for sticking in people's brains because Rockstar always made this really interesting choice to have a pretty solid suite of cheats that one could choose from that enabled you to obviously completely turn the game upside down. But the one thing they never did, to my memory or to my knowledge at least, correct me if I'm wrong, chat, was they never let you have like just straight up infinite health. You could replenish your health and you could replenish your armor, but there was never straight up like a god mode or anything like that in 3 Vice City and San Andreas.
I don't
That
remember.
that's my recollection, which meant that you kind of had to remember that the health and armor cheat and type that in and be ready to, because I remember there being like really tight situations in missions where you're like, how quickly can I get that final left down right up kind of mushed in there before someone shoots me in the head, and never fast enough, as was often the case. Um, Anyway, I digress. Jonesy, I do just want to pick your brain on one more thing, if I may, while we're on the topic of Baldur's Gate 3. I thought it was interesting that you mentioned perhaps certain titles like Cyberpunk or Dying Light 2, games that potentially overpromised and underdelivered when it came to the degree to which players can make choices, the flexibility of those stories to potentially react to those players' choices. One thing that has been interesting in the aftermath of Baldur's Gate 3 has been some of the conversations that have happened on social media around whether or not gamers should be able to basically use Baldur's Gate 3 as the new bar to kind of measure future releases and future RPGs against, whether that's a fair expectation to have, whether or not gamers are entitled by believing that all future RPGs from this point on should endeavor to be as good or as feature complete or as flexible as something like Baldur's Gate 3. The Twitter thread in question started when a game developer whose name I'm really sorry, this is a really tough one to pronounce, and I'm going to ask you to do it as well so that we can suffer together. Zalavier, would you say?
Yeah, I think I'd say Zalavier.
Xavier Nelson Jr. The first letter in that first name is an X, by the way, for anyone wondering. Basically, they argued that Larian took a massive risk in making Baldur's Gate 3, and the process used to build the game can't necessarily be replicated by other studios, even big companies. For reference, I think Larian have about 400 employees. That's something I heard midweek and didn't fact check, so I apologize if that's wrong, but that's the number I've got in my head. There are, of course, plenty of other studios out there that have similar numbers, and plenty of other studios out there that eclipse those numbers by many hundreds, if not thousands. The quote was, or one of the quotes, excuse me, was, trying to do the same thing in the same way, especially without the same advantages, could kill an entire group of studios. The advantages in question being, some of which have kind of been debunked, the number of employees, the funding of the studio, and the strength, the supposed strength at least, of the Baldur's Gate IP, which, I question somewhat, but I kind of see where they're coming from. That said, it drew a lot of responses. Some people agreed with them, Jonesy. Other developers, in fact, from major studios like Obsidian, Blizzard, and Insomniac agreed with Xavier. Many others, though, completely disagreed. It was actually one of the more popular and well-received IGN videos that I've seen in quite a long time. Was a reporter or a journalist over there called Destin Legary basically doing a piece to camera explaining why, in his opinion, it was totally fair and reasonable for players to measure their expectations for future RPGs or just future titles in general for against something like Baldur's Gate 3, and this idea that, look, if Larian could do it, if they could take the time, whether it was through the early access launch going back to 2020 and the 3 years of learning they did in that process, whether it was their approach to microtransactions, i.e., there aren't any, how feature complete the game is, how polished the game is. That one with an asterisk, because I know some people have pointed out that certain parts of the game aren't super polished, but basically that's been the argument. Is like, is it fair to take one of the most well received and now highest played RPGs of all time and say, hey, Obsidian or Bethesda Game Studios or CD Projekt Red or whoever the fuck is next. This is what you have to do now. This is the level.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
No,
let's move on, shall we?
the only thing I would expand on is to say is, okay, let me be a little bit more like fence-ity. If the devs who were saying that this isn't what you should expect, or if what they're trying to say is this isn't necessarily what you should expect from every AAA RPG, then fine. Because you might find that actually they're doing more, they're spending more time, or they're putting more resource into something else in the game, and so you can't expect it to be as feature complete from the RPG front as Baldur's Gate 3 is. If that's what they're trying to say, I think that's absolutely fine and fair. Like, you can't say I want my game to have everything and to be this. I get that. If they're saying like, no, like you should be able to expect this from games that are similar, but don't expect it from every RPG. But if they're saying that just like a company have done it, but don't ever expect to see this again from any other developer, then I'm like, what? Like, no, why should they be regarded as something that you shouldn't expect from a game of a similar caliber and style? Like, they've just proven that it's possible. I think one thing that is different now is I think a lot of the there's quite a lot of dialogue responses that are like have AI backing them up in Baldur's Gate 3, because there's so much dialogue. There's like millions of lines of dialogue and things like that. So it wouldn't have been possible for them to go in and like hard code absolutely everything in the game. So some of it is procedural, some of it like utilizes AI. So fair enough. If you want to say that this is a turning point and looking forward because of the tech, it's going to be available, and some of these devs haven't quite caught up yet with realizing, what Baldur's Gate have done, or what Larian have utilized to get the game over the line. Again, fine. But if you're trying to tell gamers that they shouldn't expect something which has been developed in 4 years by 400 people and is doing very well, I think that's a load of rubbish. Like, why not?
One argument could be, for example, that obviously Larian, I don't know how much about the way they operate, but I know they published Baldur's Gate 3 themselves. So it's like a fairly kind of like self-involved and kind of like self-contained process. I suppose there might be developers out there who work under big publishers where maybe there are certain other things that need to be considered, whether it's the schedule where developers never feel like they're given the amount of time that they need. Obviously budgeting, developers will often feel like they don't have the amount of money that they need. Maybe the hiring is never in place, and so on and so forth. Like, what if this was the response from someone who is a developer at, say, like Ubisoft, saying, hey, I respect what Larian have done, but you can never tweet shit at me because I work in a company, or I work in an ecosystem that will never allow us to make a game like this, and the actual reason is for corporate measures that we can't. Like, we are absolutely talented enough and like experienced enough, or whatever the metric you want to use, to make something like this, but we work in an environment that will never let us. So please don't hold the next Ubisoft game or the next Microsoft Game Studios game to the same degree, because it's not made under the same circumstances.
Capitalism, baby. If Ubisoft can't do it because of the way that they operate, then someone else will come along and they will eat your lunch and they will do it for you instead. And then you will leave and go and work for that company because they'll make a lot more money.
Yep.
I'm with you to some degree. Like, you can't change it inside a company you work for. That's fine. Like, that's absolutely fair. So yeah, I take your point there. I'm being a little bit like flippant. But to say that, I think some of these devs were kind of almost saying the thread on X was kind of like, don't exploit gamers. You're being too entitled if you think that this is something you're going to get in the future. And I'm like, no, that's like saying that you saw a really amazing film with amazing cinematography, and then you expect other films have good cinematography, and other cinematographers tell you, well, no, we're not going to do that. Like, yeah, but I can still say, oh, it's a shame you weren't as good as that other film. It doesn't mean that I should be expecting, shit, because that's not the way the industry is structured. Then the industry needs to change. We're in a new era of
Yeah,
RPGs.
yeah. And you wonder if something like Baldur's Gate 3 could be the thing that initiates that change, because like before, if you were to ask, like you go back to that like hypothetical I gave about an RPG being developed at a publisher like Ubisoft, they might have said, well, actually the team size or the budget or the schedule is restricted for budgetary reasons and it's all tied into the bottom line. But when you look at the way that this game is selling, Baldur's Gate 3, like there's no way on earth that this whatever process that has led Larry into this point hasn't been profitable. Whether it's the early access approach, whether it's the number of people that worked on it, whether it's I don't know what circumstances they developed this game under, or how much crunch they did, or whatever it is, but like whatever, like no matter what it took to get them to this point, it has to have been profitable, and I'm sure more profitable than a lot of other games from major publishers recently. So it's weird to know that this thing exists as something of an outlier, both in terms of its quality in some respects, but also in terms of its like the process it took to get it to this point, and how frequently we see that from essentially independent and self-published titles. And yet, I don't think it's going to be this like siren call to the Activisions and the Ubisofts and the EAs of the world to change the way they do business. Like this is like there's no one at EA saying we got to learn a lot from these Larian guys about how we handle BioWare and the next Mass Effect. That's just not so. Yeah, and I don't know how I feel about that. There's an inevitability to it that doesn't bum me out that much, because that's just the way that games work. But yeah, it's interesting.
It is interesting, and it'll be interesting to see what the outcome is. Like, I can easily see how Starfield comes out, and there are people saying things like, "Well, the RPG elements weren't as good as Baldur's Gate. The
Yeah.
way you approach it wasn't." But then at the same time, they're going to be such very different games. Where one is, obviously
Yeah.
there's so much focus on with a game like Starfield on world building and massive like interplanetary travel. Like it's a massive part of game development as well. They obviously don't just have the time to focus on one element. So I think the games industry at the moment is probably the widest it's ever been. From we're happy to play like pixelated 2D side scrollers coming out of an indie
Yeah.
dev, and we're happy to play absolutely gigantic $1 billion like RPGs that are incredible. Like there's scope from everywhere in between. But what you can't do is to then drop a game which completely underperforms and then say, well, it's not our fault, games are too hard, because
Yes.
we can see
Agreed.
that that's not necessarily the case. But it is difficult, and this is going to be a game you didn't think I would mention. Redfall is a game that when Microsoft and Jim Ryan were talking about, to your point about the fact of like publishers and might
Phil
stop
Spencer.
Phil Spencer, sorry, might stop people from doing what they really want to do. Like it was Phil Spencer who in an interview said, we will never stop a company developing a product they want to, because they want to change and do things differently and see if they can do a different sort of game, even if it means sometimes we fail. Because I think the quote in this from Zalavier was they took a really big risk and it paid off. But Phil Spencer said that I can't remember who was Redfall. It was
That was Arcane.
Arcane. So what his point was, like, Arcane took a massive risk and it didn't pay off. But that's the other side of taking a risk. And it's not like they immediately wound up Arcane and said, you're never making another game again.
No, it's true. It's true.
So no, sometimes risks pay off, sometimes they don't. And in this instance, it paid off. So
yeah. And I very much agree with your earlier point as well about like the degree to which future titles are going to be compared to something like Baldur's Gate 3. I actually think Starfield's a really strong example of a game that a lot of people are going to put that RPG label on, and rightly so. But at the same time, there is a bit of apples and oranges going on with Baldur's Gate 3 and Starfield, because even within a genre as broad and as all-encompassing as RPGs, you can aim for different things and achieve different things and have strengths and weaknesses in different areas. And whilst there isn't a lot of conversation devoted to Baldur's Gate 3's weaknesses at the moment, because it doesn't really have any, or doesn't have many, like that conversation will grow in the future. That always happens in video games. And there is also just the other flip side of it, which is not a question of what Baldur's Gate 3 does wrong, but what Baldur's Gate 3 doesn't do, or doesn't even try and do, because its focus is on these other areas of game design or other areas of game development. Or, like I said, everything that's encompassed by RPGs. And you're totally right that like when we get to Game of the Year, like Baldur's Gate 3 is going to be there, and fucking, you know, Tears of the Kingdom is going to be there, and so on and so, like some of the best games of all time is going to be there. But there might also be some fucking indie title with a really, you know, at least visually simplistic art style that was made by a team of 3 people that you didn't like because it's got a story about discovering your sexuality, and you know I know how much that triggers you, and you know that your right-leaning tendencies, and I'll play it for you and I'll tell you how great it is, and you'll kind of roll your eyes, and that's just the way that our dynamic works. But you're absolutely, and that's why, that's the point I was going to make. I actually think that when people talk about what they want future developers to see in Baldur's Gate 3 that they replicate and stuff like that, it's not necessarily this all-encompassing and really, you know, far-reaching replication of the tabletop RPG formula. It's not that they want every single game to give every player an unbelievable amount of options as to how they proceed through the story and an unbelievable amount of ways of reacting to those actions. I think it's some of just the fundamentals of Baldur's Gate 3, that some of which we've already mentioned, like the fact that, like, obviously it went through an early access period, but that early access period was seemingly used quite well as an opportunity to let players get eyes on the game, improve the quality of the game, and get it to where it needs to be. They put, you know, a flag in the sand, or whatever the expression is, for when they wanted the game to come out. It came out. They've been very quick when it comes to hot fixes. They've been very communicative when it comes to what they're working on and how things are going to improve in the future. Like a very constant and very thorough stream of communication, which, I mean, you mentioned Arcane earlier. Like, that was the opposite of Redfall. We didn't know we still don't really know what's going on with Redfall in some respects, many, many months later. Day zero or day one DLC or pre-installed DLC, microtransactions, the level of polish and things like that. I think those are just the fundamentals that more people want to see replicated across AAA gaming, that Baldur's Gate 3 is a pretty strong example of, as opposed to, it's not their way of saying, I need the next Madden game to allow me to, you know, pull the referee's trousers down and start sucking his dick, and it needs to be able to respond like perfectly to what would actually happen if someone actually did that in real life. Like, I don't think that's the takeaway here. The takeaway is there, it's like, look at what a gamer-friendly approach Larian have taken to developing, releasing, selling this game. I wish more studios did that too.
I think as well, like, we have to remember that a lot of games are given the RPG tag, which are that they actually just have RPG elements. Like, they're not trying to be full RPGs. They're just trying to take some of that, just to like make the game a little bit sort of more, a bit fuller, a little bit more dynamic. And so, yeah, I'm totally with you. Like, if every game for the next 3 years was a clone of Baldur's Gate 3 and was really good, we would all be saying, like, Jesus Christ, give us some GTA, give us like a COD, give us something on rails where we have to do a specific thing, but we get to shoot people in the face in real high fidelity and, you know, with some really nice twitchy controls. Like, it doesn't work if everything's the same. Like, that's not what we're saying. But it is. Yeah, I think we're in agreement that to say that you shouldn't expect this level from another studio making a similar title is ridiculous.
Yeah, it's a silly statement. It's a silly statement, and I can understand why it might have come from a good place for certain developers who felt like they were looking out for or protecting other developers, especially in the social media environment we live in, where making a bad game can get you death threats. And you know, I think sometimes developers try to rally together around those kind of things. But I very much agree when it comes to like the fundamental meaning behind the original message and how it kind of missed the point in some respects. And when it comes to the fundamental meaning of this podcast, the who's, what's, when, where's, and most importantly, why's of the Super Show, really for me, it all comes back down to money. And what better way to give us money than by supporting us on Patreon? You can head over and do so at patreon.com/supershow. And if you do head over to that link, what you'll find you'll be greeted with is a number of different tiers that you can pledge to at different amounts of money, and a number of different rewards that you shall be given in return for pledging at those various tiers. So if, for example, the idea of having access to a Discord server, or being able to watch Patreon exclusive podcasts or Patreon exclusive videos or anything of that nature sounds interesting to you, then I implore you to head over to patreon.com/supershow, take a look around, see if anything catches your eye or takes your fancy, and if you do feel moved enough to pledge even a small amount of money, we would very much appreciate it, because it is the sole reason and the sole way we are able to keep this podcast going, and keeping it on the radio waves. I'm also very grateful to be able to say that some fine people have already head over to that link and seen fit to share some of their hard-earned money with us. There are some names of some of those people on screen right now. A huge shout out to all of them. Thank you all very much. But I'd also like to give a personal shout out, if I may, to Aaron Cameron, Athletic Gravy, Brimstone, Cole K, I Snort Rock Salt, Jesper Camdal Nielsen, Leo Merger, Mindful Pig, Mr. Anthropic, Pastors Guild. And then, of course, we have the big dogs, the head honchos, the members of the board, Brett Z, aka Shell Shock, Geometric Potter, Hacksaw Bookread, Manuel Guerrero, and Peaswad. Again, all joking aside, thank you all so much. I know we say it every week, but that's because we mean it every week. Patreon is genuinely the thing that keeps this podcast going. It's the reason Jonesy and I are back here every week doing something and putting something out into the ether, even when there's not that much that comes back from the other direction. It's the way that we know that some of you out there would love to see this thing carry on going, and so we're going to oblige, right?
Absolutely.
Hell yeah. And on that note, Jonesy, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I will.
It's like a dating video. How old are you? How tall are you?
Hello. I like long walks on the beach.
There it is.
And holding hands and splitting the bill 50-50.
Oh, wow. The modern man.
I'm going to be really brief this week because I've not played much. I played a little bit more Jedi Survivor. I'm very close to finishing that game now, but I'm not quite. Oh, do you know what? I will take 1 second with Jedi Survivor to say one of the reasons it's taken me a little bit longer than I thought was because there are some level design elements of that game which do not jive with me. And I've actually gotten to a point where I do find it a little frustrating just through like literal level traversal. I'm at the point now where I have everything unlocked traversal wise, and some of it is fine, but it feels like, I don't know, it feels like they were a little bit lacking on certain level design elements. That they were like, oh, just stick that there. Oh, I don't know. Yeah, just stick that there. That'll work. And I don't know. I'm not loving it. But it's fine.
How many hours do you think you got left? Can you push through?
Yeah, no, I will. I'm going to finish it. I'm close enough. I think I'm close enough to the end that it's probably 2 hours maybe to finish it.
Oh, right. Okay. In that case, actually, I was about to say something that would probably be a spoiler, so I'm not going to say it. I was going to take the piss out of that game and one of the stupid elements, but we can save all that for when you finished it.
Yeah. I'll do a proper like little breakdown when I've actually finished it. No, but I checked out a film called A Man Called Otto, which I really enjoyed and thought I would quickly give it a shout out on the pod. Based on a book, I think it's a Swedish book. Any Swedes out there? It's Tom Hanks. It's the American. I think the book came out in Swedish and then was adapted into English, and then it's been adapted to like be American because obviously it's based in. I think it's based in Sweden, so it's been a little tweaked a little bit. But yeah, it's just a decent like character movie that I thought was fun and I liked, and I do enjoy Tom Hanks, and I thought this was a good little film. So check it out if you are so inclined.
Nice. How many thumbs up, Roger Ebert?
Two thumbs up. It was good.
There we go. It doesn't get any better than that. Tom Hanks, if you're watching, we love you, we respect you, and we thank you for your increasingly watchable body of work. And I'm looking forward to another Toy Story film. What, Jonesy? How would you? This came up in a thing I was watching the other day. Rank the 4 Toy Story films. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but rank the 4 Toy Story films.
Oh God, I've not seen all of them.
How do you have kids? You're at the age of your kids, and you haven't seen. You should have watched all of them like 10 times each by now.
To them, the Toy Story films would be like so dated. Like
wow.
When did the first one come out? Like 99 or something? Like 2000 maybe?
Late 90s, I'd have said.
So the equivalent of that would, like, when I was born, would have, if you make the same jump, would have been me watching a film that came out in like 1970. So
yeah, perfect.
My kids they like more modern animation I suppose.
That's really interesting.
But no,
I guess
we would watch it. They probably would watch it. They probably would love it. But it was a little late for me for the sort of animated films that I was into, so I didn't have the same thing that a lot of people I know had, where they were kids when it came out. Like I think I was like 16, sort of 17 when the first one came out. Maybe 15 or something like that. So I was already watching more grown up films. I wasn't as into Toy Story.
okay.
So I think I've
Yeah.
seen 3 of them. I've seen the first one for me is the best. I think the first one's I do really like the first one. I think it's a solid film. Um, the one with, I'm going to just completely mess this up. There's one with a fork, like a weird spork fork.
Oh, see, that's the fourth one. That's the most recent one.
So I've seen that, and I didn't really. I was kind of like, oh, this isn't that great.
Okay.
And I think I've seen the second one. So I'm okay. I'm going to go 1, 2,
Second
4.
one is Prospector and Jesse and the fat guy with the goatee who's the collector who wears the chicken suit and Woody gets his
I
arm
have
sewed
seen
back
that.
on.
Yes, I have seen. Okay, yeah. So I'd go from what I remember. I would say 1, 2, 4, and I don't think I've seen
Yeah.
3. Is
Three-
3 the
three
one with
is
the
the-
aliens?
No, the aliens are in a few of them.
Right.
Three's the one with the daycare center, which is run by like this mafia boss who's like a big purple bear.
No, I've not seen that.
Okay,
So
interesting.
I definitely haven't seen that.
No, it was just a random thought, but then it brought. Again, I'll keep this brief because I know this might not be interesting for everyone. It's just a video game podcast, so I apologize. But now I feel like I have to ask. When I was growing up, and I feel like maybe for when you were growing up as well, to a certain extent, because I know there's a few years between us, but I don't think that much changed in the downtime. VHS copies of like Disney films from the 50s and 60s could still be relevant because they were considered classics.
Yeah.
And I would be a 4-year-old watching fucking Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and it didn't matter that there was 40, 50 years between that and Hercules. They were kind of part of the same family. Is there something that shifted when like Pixar and DreamWorks and Disney animated studios and when that stuff started happening, because there was almost like a slightly primitive quality to those very early all animated films, that they like are noticeably not from the same grouping as like the where animation has gone since?
I think there is I do think there's a notable difference. Like
Interesting.
those early CGI, like completely CGI films I do think they're harder to watch.
Okay.
And I think the other thing for me is it's less so the quality, because obviously Toy Story 1's a really high quality film, and even though the animation's not right up there, but the just sheer number, like having kids now, the sheer number of animated, very well animated CG films that are shit is incredible. Like you'll start watching something and it looks really nice. The CG is up there with like a Toy Story, like a modern Toy Story, but the storytelling, the writing, the voice acting is crap. And you're just like,
Right.
how did they have the budget to make this? And then, so I'd say like my kids, it was more like Cars 3, Wall-E, stuff like that was, which is like very good animation, like very high level.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, you're still talking Pixar, right? Which I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like most people, I feel like some people feel like Pixar started to lose their way, if anything, sort of during the pandemic. I feel like a lot,
Right.
the last 3 years of Pixar films have been a little bit like I remember. I feel like pre-pandemic, the only one that people weren't sure about was the one that was called The Good Dinosaur, I think. That some people weren't that hot on, but there were still films like Inside Out that were like very much acclaimed. And then you got into the pandemic, and it was like there was Soul. Do you remember the guy who Jamie Foxx, I think, plays the jazz musician who ends up like
yeah, I didn't
doing
see
like a
that.
spirit version of himself. There were a bunch of
I'm forgetting that. So I'm gonna get confused now of the era, but so things like Moana, amazing.
Yeah, I think that was just pre-pandemic because Chris and I would sing "You're Welcome" in the office.
the which is the Mexican one with the kid who plays the guitar, like that was really good. I can't remember what it's called. Anyway, I can't remember what it's called. And then there's been a couple of others.
Luca.
No, Luca was the fish one.
Oh, Luca was Coco was the
yes.
The Hispanic one.
Luca.
Right. See, Luca was one like so. Basically, Onward, which was the one I remember thinking, oh, this would be a big deal because like the two leads are voiced by Tom Holland and Chris Pratt. Like I don't know anyone that talks about Onward. That's where they
Oh,
play like those goblin-looking dudes who go on a road
so
trip.
Onward is good. I've seen Onward a couple of times, but tell you the weird thing that happens. So I like Onward. My kids don't like Onward.
Oh, weird.
No,
That's
they're
okay.
not into it at all. They love Moana, but they hated Coco. I loved Coco. They hated Luca. I loved Luca. It's weird, like the way
Yeah.
that I see things they don't, or they see things I don't see, and they're like, "This isn't for me."
Interesting. I suppose there was always a bit of that in Pixar, but usually in a way that united families rather than split them.
Split them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other ones were Soul, which we mentioned, Turning Red, which I think was the person
The Red
who
Panda.
turns into a panda when they get angry or something like that, or
Yeah,
they're on the bit
we
something to do with
didn't
period.
really rate that. No,
Then
I don't. Oh, maybe it was. Yeah, no, I suppose the alternative was, but the actual film, like, is shit.
I read the name of the title of the film and just assumed it was a period analogy, like a woman turns into a red panda every time she's on the blob.
Maybe.
I don't
Uh,
know. I
it's
haven't seen it. I just want to get one of those
I
things where you guess an interpretation and you realize you're going to prefer your interpretation to anything real, so you just ignore it. You just mute it.
Yeah, but there have also been some weird, and then there are the weird ones that are kind of like, I can't even remember the names of them, where they've got good casts, the animation's done very well, but they're trying to be Pixar. That I couldn't even tell you the names of
Oh,
them. I watched loads of them and they're the ones you end up watching multiple times with kids, and then you're like, this just isn't that good, but it's got a good cast. You've recognized some of the actors, but it's just not quite up there. Yeah, we're in a
yeah.
weird space with
I
animated
was
films.
gonna say the last two, like Lightyear, seemed like a slam dunk, but people weren't that hot on it.
Not
And then
seen it, yeah.
Elemental actually became one of those weird things where, like the kind of the I don't know if they're actually like right leaning political YouTube channels, but the kind of thumbnails I associate with those YouTube channels,
Yeah.
I saw loads of Elemental things. Well, look at Elemental, it's making no money, and it actually made money, and they were
Oh,
then
I've not seen Element. I've not even heard of Elemental.
Elemental was one of those ones where, again, I just looked and it was like, oh, they're kind of doing the inside out things where everyone's an emotion, except now you're an element rather than a feeling.
Ah, okay.
So,
That
like,
was
the water person isn't allowed to fall in love with the fire person. Oh, but what if, Josie, what if they did?
I did see a fair few things, like you were saying, the right leaning things where they're going crazy about things not making money being shit about Barbie, and then it made like over $1 billion, and then it was like still shit. Although actually, I saw a lot of people saying they even that they still liked it, but
Yeah. Well,
for
Joe
different
Rogan defended
reasons.
it, right?
He's not
Or,
even. He's not.
He said he doesn't understand why people lost their shit about it. And
Yeah,
some
from what
people,
I've heard, I haven't seen it. I think it sounds
yeah.
good, but it's he's got like 3 daughters, and he's not right. He's not right wing. He's like a
No, but
proper
some people like to put
centrist.
him in that bowl of soup, don't they?
I want to see it. I'd love to
Yeah.
take the kids to see it, but
Hey, new expression for you. Go woke, get rich. I think
no.
that
See,
might work.
it's all going to turn around when the Marvels comes out and they just lose like $1 billion, and then everyone,
Oh god.
the
Do you
world
know
will
what?
feel right again.
I
Get
feel
woke,
really
go
sorry.
broke.
I just want to give Brie Larson a great big hug the night before that film premieres and just say, hey, it's gonna be alright. You're a good actress. Um
She no, but this is the thing. She is good, and Captain
Marvelous
Marvel
Miss Maisel.
Captain Marvel is never going to do well. It can't, because those characters are impossible. Like we were saying before, like the Superman character is so difficult. Ms. Marvel was not done well, like the way they did her powers. I like the actress and I like the show, but I hate how they interpreted her powers. And then
Mm,
I just can't see how putting those things together. Like I saw a clip of Captain Marvel fighting Ms. Marvel and another person, and
yeah.
immediately I'm like, Ms. Marvel. Oh, Jesus, I keep getting it wrong. Captain Marvel is infinitely powerful, right? Yet she can still have a ruck with a girl who can make her hand stretch. Like, do me a favor. Like, this is just ridiculous.
Yeah, but then that's what those films have always been to a certain extent, right? Is that like we're gonna have you believe that for the sake of tension, that there always has to be, even when usually it's in the relationship between the heroes and the villains. Here's a big villain that has to look insurmountable for 90 minutes and then have one key weakness for the final 30, and it's been that over and over again.
Yes.
Now it's just applied to even the heroes and even some of the infighting, and the infighting has always been a little bit weird because like. I'm not going to wade into the conversation between who would actually win in a fight between Iron Man or Captain America. But if they actually both wanted to kill each other, they wouldn't both walk away ultimately unscathed and then make friends again in the next movie like they did. So, yeah, I don't know. Marvel, eh? The MCU. Who needs it? Not us. Do you know why?
Exactly.
We got video games. And did just want to give one quick shout out to something, and I'm going to keep it brief because it's something we've talked about not just before, but we've talked about already this year, which is that um, I am, for some reason, rewatching the Double Fine Psych Odyssey, which is
Love it.
I mean it holds up second time around, Josie, even after 5 or 6 months. For anyone that missed it, it's the documentary that it kind of explores and documents the 7-year development process that Psychonauts 2 underwent over at Double Fine. And it's a really engaging and insightful look into not just the game development process, but I think the creative process, especially over an extremely long period of time, longer than almost any other medium or art form spends on a single project, especially with that many people and that much money invested. The thing is, this time I'm doing it while playing Psychonauts 2. Which if nothing else, I almost just wanted to say, because I know Chris is probably going to listen to this at some point. Hi, Chris. I know you're there. Maybe I'm guessing tomorrow. I'm going to say Tuesday. Maybe while he's at work, he's got this on the background. I hope you're
You'll
having a
get a
good day.
message.
Yeah, I know. I'll look at my phone tomorrow and I'll see it. So yeah, my feelings on Psychonauts 2 are still developing, and maybe I'll look back around to that later if I think they're interesting enough. I don't have that much to add, but it's definitely fascinating playing that game and watching that series at the same time. And yeah, if anyone feels like if anyone missed out that series at the time, or was put off because it was like on YouTube or not on Netflix, or put off because it's 24 hours long and you could spend your time doing something else, just give it a go because it's really, really good. Speaking of Netflix, though, Jonesy, they've got a couple of interesting irons in the fire. Do you want to hear about some of them?
Oh, I definitely do.
Well, we know for a little while now they've been kind of getting more and more interested in gaming. People who have, for example, got the Netflix mobile app and signed up may have already seen that they've got some gaming options on there. You could have, for example, played Into the Breach or something like that on your iPhone or your iPad, courtesy of your Netflix subscription. They are now expanding that out, though, Jonesy, and they're testing game streaming in Canada and the UK. So how this is essentially going to work is, using your Netflix account, you're going to be streaming games, like much like you did on services like OnLive or Google Stadia, to your TV, obviously this time, because up to this point they've delivered all their services through the app that's been available on phones and tablets, as I mentioned. And this time, because obviously a lot of people out there might have a Netflix subscription but not have a controller to hand, you're going to use your phone as a controller.
Yeah, I think they've said that they use the phone as the controller, but they're also going to expand this beta into PC through Netflix.com in a couple of weeks. And they said for
Nice.
that you can use mouse and keyboard, which mouse and keyboard sounds a lot more desirable to me than your phone, because I've done that. You remember the old PlayStation games where you could like link up your phone to it, like the party games, and you could play? I never had a
Yeah.
good experience doing that.
I know, and even then, those were relatively simplistic. And I think the problem with a phone is that 99.9% of phones that are sold nowadays, you've got to imagine, certainly in countries like the UK and Canada where this is being tested, are touchscreens, and touchscreens don't offer the most tactile, control-like responses.
Nope.
Now, admittedly, when it comes to the software people are going to be testing this out on, that might not be that important. Oxenfree and Molehew's Mining Adventure are going to be made available to select members in the UK and Canada for beta testing. And it's also worth noting that the current closed beta is only going to be working on a few select TVs before, like Josie said, it comes to PC and Mac in a few months via Netflix.com. Those two games don't sound like they're going to necessitate a very complex control system that might have been offered by a controller. But by the same token, going forward, is it going to be one of those things where a smartphone as a controller is just an entry method and it's actually going to be fine and people that care enough can invest in a real controller? Or is it going to be a situation where actually it's a negative enough experience that it's off-putting for anyone?
It's interesting. I think it will be off-putting for people when they realize how bad it is to use a smartphone as a controller. I don't think. I mean, listen to me, the engineer. I can't imagine the use of a Bluetooth controller for like Xbox, PlayStation, Steam controller is impossible to link up to a TV with a bit of a
Right.
firmware update and then allow you to use that to control it. Because I haven't got the list in front of me, but I think the list of TVs is kind of what you'd imagine that they're doing this through. So it's like smart TVs, it's very modern TVs that aren't as limited, in more traditional TVs, and so that's how you can connect your phone in the first place. So as soon as I think they, for me, the real thing here is it's not a mobile game like Oxen. The other game that they're talking about is a new game which I haven't seen, Molehew's Mining Adventure, but like Oxenfree is pretty straightforward. It's kind of simple, but it's a proper game. And as soon
Yeah.
as that they can prove that that works in their ecosystem, streaming straight to a TV, I think getting the controller situation sorted is got to be one of the easier things to solve. Surely the streaming in the first place is the thing, because surely the data rate is what they're at, how the latency and things like that. As soon as they've done that through the testing, if they're happy with all of that, you've got to assume that the controller thing is going to be relatively straightforward.
Yeah.
Even if it comes down to, if you don't own a controller, go out and buy the cheapest controller that you can find available. As long as it's Bluetooth, you can hook it up to your TV, you can play
Yeah.
along. Like,
Go get that one that controlled the submarine that imploded with the nipples for analog sticks.
yeah,
Um,
like
no, I
mate,
think
this
you're
is
right.
it. This is your comeuppance finally arriving, and it's
I,
only 5 years too late.
that is the one thing I have going for me, is that we're now in the second half of 2023. So I'll always have that leg to stand on, that estimates were off by a little bit. But I think it's going to be interesting. Like, when I hear something like this, and I don't know if you kind of have a rebuttal to any of my thoughts, but it's like I see this as a curious kind of like investigative move by Netflix to see how this kind of, like, whether or not this is feasible and how many people are actually interested in it. And I think the one thing that Netflix do have going, because I agree with you that some of the problems that they might have on the surface are pretty surmountable, like the controller. I think having people use their phones as a controller means that someone can test this stuff out for one reason or another immediately, and then invest in it if they're convinced. And controllers aren't massive investments in the grand scheme of things, especially when compared to game consoles and so on and so forth. And I think the other thing they've got, that Google Stadia was probably, as an example, was probably always facing an uphill battle against, although I never necessarily saw a complete post-mortem on that, was like users. There are already millions upon millions of Netflix users. And if you can communicate to them that they've got access to this kind of thing, maybe not at this stage where it's all in beta, but if there's a wider rollout, communicate to them, hey, you've got this, you've already paid for this, you can just do this right now. I think some people will try. I just don't know how many, because that's already been the case and already made a lot more sense in the mobile version of things. And I don't know anyone who's doing it. I'm not doing it. I haven't played.
Me either.
Um, yeah, I haven't played Oxenfree 1, let alone Oxenfree 2. I haven't played Into the Breach. There are critically acclaimed games sitting in my Netflix app on my phone that I already paid for to watch movies that I don't, to have access to movies that I more often than not don't watch. And I'm also not playing the games.
For me, the thing that it will come down to is like you've said. It's the install base. The install base is already there with Netflix. It's massive. Loads of people are already subscribed. As soon as there is a game available on Netflix that you can play on your TV, no other purchase is necessary. And it's already included in your membership, and you say, where can I play this? Because you do the thing. If you check Game Pass, you check if it's on PlayStation Plus, you see if it's available anywhere. You've already got access before you sort of say, oh, okay, I'm going to buy it. The second that you see that game's available on Netflix, and or the other side of that is you say, what free games are available? And let's say Netflix have done a really
Yeah.
big push to say these games are all coming to Netflix. As soon as it becomes something you can do, I think people will start to do it. And I don't even think it's going to. I always thought it would be new games, big games like Stadia were trying to sort of get big new things and get some really big games under their belts.
Yeah.
I actually
Well,
think
Stadia had to deal with Baldur's Gate at one point. Like, one
right.
of the
Yeah, of course they
first
did.
ever Baldur's Gate 3 trailers was a Stadia Direct, or whatever it was called.
Yeah, I think that's where it was announced, right before the 2019 E3. I think it was a
Yeah.
Stadia thing. But if they can actually just get some games on there that become a place where kids like go to play, it will become a thing of, rather than, do I need to buy you a game console? No, you've already got access to
Yeah.
this many games, and it will be entry level games. It could be like if they got Minecraft on Netflix, that would be ridiculous. The second they do that, I mean, something like that's probably less likely because I don't know how the storefront would work. I don't know how that would integrate. It's going to be a bit tricky. Um, but I think it's the step. It's a step on the path. In the same way that back in the day that Netflix used to post you DVDs, which now seems ludicrous. Um,
Sure. Sure.
and they then made the move to streaming, and now I think this is another step on the path of not
I
requiring a console.
I find it, well, that's the thing. I find it hard to disagree with it being another step on the path. I just don't know if I'm 100% aligned with you on where this path is going yet. Like, I don't know if I'm willing to call this the path to people not buying consoles anymore. It's a path. Um, I just think like
It's not
you
necessarily
made
the
some,
path, yeah.
you made some interesting points, and I think like the kids angle is an interesting one to consider, and the potential for like fucking like you said Minecraft or Roblox implementation or something weird like that, like completely swaying the numbers, and then you get the kind of the almost the educational piece where kids are informing their parents on things, and like any parent being told they don't have to spend money on X because they already have Y is probably going to bite off their hand because that makes sense in any household. Um, it's just I still think there are elements here. Like one of the things you were talking about there was that when you're considering finding something new to play or something's come out and you want to see if it's free anywhere, and like you're scanning, you know, PlayStation Plus and Xbox Game Pass and so on and so forth. And I still think that's a niche thing to do. I think people who just generically play games don't do that.
Yeah.
They either buy them or they don't, based on whether or not they've heard of them or they haven't. Um, and like and I don't know what the software approach is here, although Netflix have shown a willingness to spend money, whether it's like making studios or acquiring studios and acquiring IP alongside those studios in the case of Oxenfree 2 and Night Dive. Like I don't know what the big killer app is that makes people go, oh, I really need to start gaming on Netflix. I think that idea is just still so foreign to so many people, and weirdly enough, I think the thing that would help bridge the gap for them at the moment is something that is actually, at least initially, more rooted on the TV side or the movie side of their offerings, and going back and doing something like what they did with, do you remember Bandersnatch, the
Yes.
interactive Black Mirror, like doing something like that, but like that has links into the Netflix gaming side of things, and telling those tens of millions of people who watched that Black Mirror Netflix special, hey, you're also like now playing a slightly more involved and slightly more like detailed or elaborate video game courtesy of this service we also provide, and it's, by the way, it's here, and here's our library.
I
I don't
think
know.
the one thing I think I suppose Netflix have got on their side is they've already got a massive advertising platform, which is their own platform. Like the second you click on Netflix on your TV to see what's big, they could acquire a game, they could drop a game from an in-house studio,
Very true.
and they could just put it up pride of place right at the top, right next to all of the big films, and say play this game. I think you're right. I think it will be hard to get people to actually do it if it's not a game they're already looking out for, if it's not a game they're already expecting. But I think it may start to happen slowly but surely. And then the issue you're going to have is it too early? Is the experience, like you said, not quite there? So actually, what it does is rather than become a thing that people choose to do again, it puts people off doing it because they're like, oh, I didn't have a very good experience. And then they're going to be
Yeah,
like 2 or 3 years before they even dare do it again because it was like, yeah, not for me.
totally.
Yeah,
Like, I,
it's
I,
tricky.
yeah, especially people who are being introduced to something for the first time. Like you and I, as sort of like broader, more accepting gamers, have experienced a number of things. Like we might have a rough first experience and dive back in later out of curiosity. But if we were, I know I don't want to speak for you, but I know if I was trying to convince my parents of something and they had a rough time, you know, first go at it, they'd be like, "Nah, Jamie, this isn't for me. Like, thank you for trying, but no." Um, and so yeah, getting it right, getting it working, getting it feeling good, getting that library there, getting that choice there. I think those are all kind of boxes that Netflix will, I'm sure, continue to tick as they go because, well, I say they're invested. Google looked like they were invested,
Yeah, they
and
did, and they've got
so
Google money.
and they got Google money. So who can really say? But well, I know one person who can say. You can say because, as you've already outlined, you think this is the first step on the path towards no more game consoles. Would you? What do you have an updated year in mind for?
It's
No more game consoles.
why?
Obviously, I think we can all agree we're going to get another generation of consoles in 2027, let's say.
Okay,
Or,
so
okay, I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
no, I think I agree with you. I think we will see another generation. Like we're already talking about PlayStation 5 Pro. I think
Yeah,
PlayStation 6 and next era of Xbox was, although saying that, I think Xbox are less committed to hardware. I think they are, like we've said loads of times before, they're pushing to win the war and to be the hub for gaming. I think they're less bothered about whether it's on a PC, whether it's on a console, whether it's cloud based.
agreed.
I agree with you that we will see another generation of consoles. Um, okay, given how the PlayStation 5 has struggled with sales of hardware,
Yeah, it really hasn't.
with when it first came out, so with the
Because,
sourcing and the stock
okay,
shortages and things,
yeah,
um,
because of manufacturing issues and a
because of
global pandemic that won't happen again.
no, admittedly, but because of like the way that there was issues with hardware and the
Yeah,
weird kind of like intergenerational place we're at now.
yeah.
Um, I think PlayStation 6 when it comes out and the Xbox whatever that is, I think they're going to be a little bit more of a. I think they'll struggle more even when they launch because of people are going to go, well, I remember when the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox X came out, like, oh, I don't know, it gets, do you even need it? There's, it's going to be a long transition before we get to these completely. So I'm going to put a
Mhm.
year on it. 2030 is the year
2030.
cloud gaming surpasses console gaming. So
So
3 years into the next generation.
yeah, in the middle of the generation after this. Okay, okay, interesting. I mean, I think that's one of the more realistic targets that you've given in all of our discussions about this.
What was my first one was
Over the
probably
years.
2020 back in the day. I was probably saying it was going to
Yeah,
be
some of
2020.
the early ones were really punchy. I won't lie, but that's because the weird thing is, there was, as you kind of hinted at in a weird way, although there were other factors that we mentioned, there was a weird amount of pessimism going into the PS5 and the Xbox Series X/S generation, the one that we're in now. Like there was a lot of feeling of like there was a time where certain people out there, certain analysts out there, onlookers, whoever, tried to almost put a bit more of a ticking time bomb on the home console than actually existed. And then the PS5 and the Xbox Series X came out and were incredibly popular. And in spite of the shortages, the PS5 is selling at the same pace as the PS4. The PS4, which itself outsold expectations and outsold the PS3. Um, it's weird. Like it's weird that we remember the 360 and the PS. The 360 is a bad example because Xbox has regressed since then. But it's weird that we remember the PS3 being such like a healthy generation, and both generations afterwards have like eclipsed it in terms of sales speed out of the gates. But at the same time, like I feel like some of that pessimism is setting back in, and I think you're right about some of the ways that you're looking at this generation and how it's going to inform the next one. A lot of people aren't ready for half-step consoles, like we talked about the other week, and a lot of those same people won't be ready for the next generation of consoles in 2027, which weirdly enough already feels too soon, even though it's 4 years away. The PlayStation 6 sounds like a stupid made-up number and a stupid made-up name. There aren't enough kind of like, as we discussed with the PS5 Pro, there aren't enough tangible like benefits or marketing, sales points for them to try and tout a new system like that yet, because no one cares about 8K and things like, I don't know, like ray tracing have thrown around too early. So now even when they are properly and well implemented, we feel like we're used to it, even though we're kind of not. They kind of shot themselves in the foot in a lot of different ways, especially when it comes to software. Like we're 3 years into the PS5, and like, what's your favorite PS5 game, Jonesy? Ratchet and Wank, like Returnal, Demon Souls. There aren't many choices.
Maybe Astrobot.
I mean that is actually, in a fucked up way, that might be the correct answer. I'd
Yeah,
have to think about it.
it is a bit weird. Can I take a second? A second? A
I was about to
second?
say take a shit
Take a
like
shit.
mid podcast. I was like,
No.
that's a brave move, but yeah, take a second.
I want to take a second to give a shout out to Magni who did a super chat for us.
Ooh.
I've got no idea how much this is. He's given us 20 knock, which is what it comes up as.
Is
I
that
don't know what that
Norwegian
is.
krona?
Yes. It's got an N and a
And
K in it, so maybe.
I,
I don't know.
oh, let me get this right. Then I think that's like the usual rule of thumb is divide it by 10 and take a little bit off. I think.
Divided by 10 and take a little. It doesn't matter. Whatever it is, anyway, it doesn't matter. Thank you very much for the super chat. We really appreciate it. But he has said, speaking of this, was when we were talking about a bit earlier, I think, when you were saying that Chris was going to listen to this podcast. Chris, this is Magni's language, not mine, so I apologize. He says, speaking of the midget, where is his promised cameo? Do you know what? He was going to make an appearance a couple of weeks ago, and due to scheduling issues, we couldn't make it happen. We actually did meet up in person. The three of us got together a couple of weeks ago, just to like hang out, and we were saying that we do need to get together again and maybe do something in person, make some content. So we will try and angle again for that to happen in the near future. And when we can collar him, he's a very busy guy with a family and a life that he's a lot going on. So when we can, we will grab him and we'll do something. But
absolutely
nothing penciled in date wise, unfortunately, as of yet.
Chris and I got the same train home that day, and the very last thing that we were talking about as I disembarked was about making sure he gets on the podcast sooner rather than later. We just need to wait for the stars to align.
It's funny. I did like so. He was saying to us when we met up a couple weeks ago that whenever he listens to the show, he's like just wants to like disagree with loads of the stuff we say or agree. And join in with the convo. So he was saying he really does miss it. But so hopefully it won't be too long.
He said he gets really annoyed when there are really obvious things we should say or reference that we don't, or like things where we have a conversation that would like link really nicely to a point we've made earlier, but we don't make the connection for some reason. It was an interesting insight into the podcast.
I thought was because he totally agreed with me about the Switch 2 in that it will not be backwards compatible.
Let's move on.
I said, will it be backwards compatible? And he said no, which is where I ended up going. And I think you said yes. And he straight was like, no, of course not. It's Nintendo. So it'll be interesting to see when that actually does come out. Three of us are in sort of slightly different places.
Yeah. I won't be able to find it now, but I know one person who agrees with me is I think it was the CEO of Take-Two Interactive when they were doing their big fucking that thing where they talk about how much money they've made. Oh, this was it. Take-Two boss says Switch 2 not being backwards compatible would quote unquote break contract with players.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, strong words from a person who has nothing to do with making that decision. But,
I don't want to open a can of worms, but
here we go.
If we completely disregard the bet, the person who was actually most right when it came to the PlayStation 5 debate was Chris at the time. I believe he actually nailed it. I think he even said it will be backwards compatible. I think he actually even stipulated for PlayStation 4 games you will be able to. I think he even said that, which is bizarre. Like it was bang on the money, like almost to the line of what they said, what PlayStation.
Yeah, but he didn't put his nuts on the line, so it doesn't count as much.
No, it doesn't count as much. But what I was going to say was, so if he's right about the not backwards compatible, he's going to prove himself a little bit of prophetic when it comes to how hardware works on future systems and things. So we'll have to get his insight the next time something big comes out.
He's had a few moments. He's had a few mystic moments. I'll give him that.
There's another one, wasn't there? I can't.
It was an acquisition. I can't remember which acquisition it was.
Oh yes, yeah. He said Microsoft
was it Bethesda?
Buy someone.
Was it Bethesda?
I think it was. Bethesda.
Yeah,
we just thought almost disregarded it, and he was absolutely right. Shocking.
Who knew that guy who we used to podcast with is actually worth listening to the whole time. I was just ignoring him. Speaking of things I like ignoring, Jonesy.
Yep.
Thinking of things that happen and I have absolutely no interest in them whatsoever because they really don't do anything for me or move my needle in the slightest.
Right.
THQ Nordic had a digital showcase this week. That was an unfair joke. I've liked plenty of THQ Nordic games over the past handful of years. Saints Row, not among them. But of course, as this was a digital showcase that they had this past week, they're instead looking forward, not looking backwards, and looking at some of the software they have coming up. A lot of things were just kind of like ticking boxes when it comes to titles that are going to be released in the near future. Like, hey, did you know that a fucking Alone in the Dark reboot is actually like really, really not far away? I kind of knew that, but it doesn't feel like it because I don't know. That's the power of THQ Nordic's marketing nowadays. Is
They're going the Ubisoft model.
yeah, like, hey, we're going to make games and not tell anyone about it. We're
Yeah.
going to reboot classic horror franchises and not to. No, it feels like they have spoken about it, but like not that many people have stopped to listen. I guess is
Yeah.
the weird thing. Like it's actually got like David Harbour from. I think we talked about this before, but David Harbour from Stranger Things, for example, is in that game.
Right. Yeah.
And so is that actress whose name escapes me from Killing Eve. Like it looks like they've put some work into it. I think the writer worked on something interesting. I think he worked on Soma. There's some chops there, but not making much of a splash. Making slightly more of a splash though, perhaps because of the IP involved. One I wanted to talk to you about first. I'm not sure if you saw the trailer, but South Park Snow Day is going to be the next South Park game. When I say next South Park game, I don't mean in the lineage of Ubisoft published RPGs that were very well received, but it's in fact a new 3D game that features some kind of like multiplayer with co-op elements. It looked like it was taking the Snow Day idea and snowball fights, but taking that to the South Park extremes and turning it into a action-packed multiplayer extravaganza. But yeah,
This
did
makes
you
me
watch
kind
the
of
trailer for
sad.
this?
I didn't watch the trailer. My first question to you was going to be, are they still following the RPG turn-based system that Ubi followed? And you've already answered the question because, okay, I had a weird relationship with those games because I played both of them at separate Ubisoft events, I believe. Oh no, maybe one of them at a Fractured But Whole Ubisoft event.
Yeah,
And
I sat next to you for that. Yeah,
yeah, and then I played some more of it when it came out, but didn't finish it. Didn't get, but I really enjoyed it. It's one of those that I always thought about. Like, oh, I need to play more of that. I need to play more of that. And then for whatever reason, it just didn't feel right. But one I've always wanted to go back to because I actually really liked how they implemented that. I liked how they used South Park. I liked the visuals of it. I thought the turn-based combat stuff was cool.
yeah.
But yeah, no, 3D co-op multiplayer sort of thing is not maybe down the same sort of path that I was hoping for with a South Park game. But there you go.
Yeah, like it's weird because no one ever would have guessed like that a turn-based RPG like that would have been the breeding grounds for a successful South Park iteration, successful South Park game. But you're right, it absolutely was. And those two games I think are really strong. Like I want to say that the Stick of Truth was developed by Obsidian. Like it's just so weird
Right.
to look back on that and saying, like, wow, like yeah, like the Fallout New Vegas guys went and did a South Park game. No
Made a
wonder,
cool
and,
South
no
Park
wonder it
game.
worked. Yeah, but the weird thing is, what I will say, having watched the trailer for this, is that the most troubling word in all the ways that we've described this game so far, based on what I've seen, is 3D. Because having seen that 2D style that really beautifully replicated the TV's animation, the TV's approach and stylistic decisions, this is like. Do you remember when they used to make South Park games for like the N64, and you're like, that doesn't look like South Park? It's that again.
It's every time they do it with The Simpsons and they make a 3D Simpsons and you're like, no thanks, that's disgusting. Put it away.
See, there were some Simpsons games that I liked the look of. I get where you're coming from, but like this is more egregious than like Road
Right.
Rage or Hit and Run. This is one of those things where you're like, wow, like Stick of Truth and Fractured But Whole had like really like beautiful recreations of the TV's art style.
They look like an episode of the any still frame of that game could have been taken straight out of an
100%.
episode of the show.
And I get that it's that form factor, that that view is a limiting limiting when it comes to the kind of game you could make. But yeah, in my opinion, just looking at the trailer, the transition to full 3D has not suited that game's art style particularly well in ways that, like I said, were reminiscent of the early South Park games of the late 90s.
Then you just realize that all those kids have giant balls for heads, and it's like,
I mean, yeah,
in 3D that doesn't look good.
yeah, pretty much, yeah. Like I shouldn't be able to see around your head; it should be flat. Yeah. You should have a perfectly flat egg-shaped head. But Jonesy, elsewhere, when it comes to THQ Nordic, there are other, classic and beloved intellectual properties that hopefully get slightly better translated into video games. One that was, I think, confirmed in this past week after some speculation, some rumors a handful of months ago, is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Last Ronin, which is going to be an adaptation of the comic book miniseries from 2020. It was discussed before that this was potentially in development as sort of like a God of War inspired third-person action adventure game with a slightly darker tone than perhaps some of the other TMNT material out there. And while no release date is revealed, we do know that it is in development and it's being handled by Black Forest Games, who did the recent remakes of Destroy All Humans 1 and 2. So that's what they are working on now. I think they did reasonably good jobs with those remakes, and I'm curious to see how TMNT could be adapted to that God of War style, if that is the direction.
Oh, it's got the potential to be something really special. I think I've been a long time fan of TMNT games, all the way back from the SNES days, and there's obviously so much you can do with those characters. They work in multiple formats. It's not kind of the same problem as something like South Park, where it's got to look a certain way. Like they've done like realistic, lifelike, down to like any sort of animation you want. And I think that there's so much to work with, especially from the combat side of it. I suppose I'm a little bit like throwing God of War in there sort of makes me wonder if that's maybe a little bit too, because I think that realistically is just a way of saying we're going to make a damn good third-person action game. Like, I think that's what they mean. It doesn't necessarily mean anything beyond that. But hey, if they do that, I think, that would be fantastic. Especially having that kind of game in a built-up city environment like the Turtles are from, if that's what they go for. But then it's Ronin. So, like, is it? I'd never read the comics. Yeah. Is it more like a set back in Japan or something like that?
Yeah, so I'm not sure, because I'm not familiar with the source material either. I can say that based on some of the sort of the concept art that has been floating around, some of which was in the very brief and very unhelpful trailer. Very unhelpful trailer.
Candles.
Yeah, exactly. Who knew? It does look like unsurprisingly there is a heavy Ronin inspiration, but what that says for kind of the setting or the environment, I'm not really familiar enough to say that. I'd have to look up the comics and see what they look like.
But it sounds wicked. Whatever it sounds like a cool thing.
And like there is still something to me where I'm sure there are some examples out there that people could remind me of that would like also fit the bill. But for me, when it comes to sort of character action games or action adventure games, there's still kind of the spectrum that a lot of them exist on, where you get sort of slightly floatier like DMC or Bayonetta in like combo driven systems, and you get slightly heavier plodding, sometimes Soulsborne inspired systems with very deliberate animations and so on and so forth. And there is this kind of like middle ground of something that is like thick and chunky and impactful in the same way Souls can be, but without being quite as punishing, and while still also having this sort of like broad and combo driven system that is present in some other character action games. So I think God of War was a really open-ended but also approachable kind of take on a split between the two. And if that's kind of what they mean by this, and I think that is still where my preferences actually lie in all of this.
I'd agree with you. For me, it comes down to like even simplistic stuff like combo cancelling, or like rolling out of a move set and stuff. Not committing to like playing Jedi Survivor, when you think, I'm going to hit that enemy 3 times, and then you hit them, and on the second hit they hit you, and I'm just like, it does my head in. Like give me some of that God of War, like more forgiving but chunky combat. And if you put that on a Turtles game, if you let me be Donatello in that sort of way, that sounds great.
Yeah. The other weird thing about that, Jones, is you actually just word for word recited the first line of my Tinder bio. Chunky yet forgiving.
Chunky yet forgiving. There you go. Do you
cool.
split the bill? On the first
I thought you were
date?
asking. I didn't know what you were going to ask me if I split for a second there. Plenty of things get split on the first date. The bill.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
That's a good question.
I was joking. Like, no, the bill's not getting split. I'm trying to show off. I'm spending the only £100 I've got to pretend that I can pay for everything. Don't worry. I'll say, don't worry about it. I'll get it. You put that down.
Oh yeah, a lot of the times in that situation, like you're kind of, although fundamentally I agree that like no one should feel like they're forced to pay the bill. Sometimes you do just want to, or sometimes you like put yourself in a position where you can, or you've budgeted for it, and you're just like, this is going to be the thing I do. Not because it's tied to like any kind of weird stereotypes, or you want to set a weird precedent, or you don't expect someone else to do something, or to, but I don't know. It's just
no, it's tied to all of those things. Trad wife all the way, and I'm ordering for her as well. She'll have the soup.
Yeah. Um, like, you see those tweets, don't you? Like dweeb colon like, oh, where do you want to go for dinner tonight? And then it's like Chad. It's like, we're going to dinner at my favorite restaurant. Wear that red dress. We're leaving in 10 minutes. You're gonna have the night of your life. And it's like, what the fuck?
I
Don't
feel
tell
like
them what to wear.
I feel like my wife would quite like that because it would be such a change from the norm. It would be yeah, if I said like we're going here, you're wearing this, she'll probably be like, thank God I haven't got to think about it. But
Oh, yeah,
the second time she would be like, it was cute once. Don't push your luck.
yeah. You just whatever you do, you got to make sure you play that cool like Russian guitar, dun, 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 like in the background. So that like and everything has to also be in slow motion and black and white. I don't know how you're going to apply those principles to a real life
Tricky,
conversation, but
yeah.
yeah. And if you could squeeze a watermark on there for your Chad lifestyle Twitter page, then we're golden.
Then you're done.
Yeah.
Like it.
Yep. Speaking of Chads, I don't know. There's who's a Chad character? Junkrat. I don't know. Is Junkrat's a bit of a...
Is he?
Who's the biggest alpha male in the Overwatch cast?
Soldier
Ro-
76 has got to be up there.
Roadhog? Is Roadhog an alpha?
No.
So you're
Screams.
saying Soldier 76 would tell his missus what dress to wear for dinner?
No, maybe not actually. I reckon maybe McCree, right, would have to, wouldn't he? He's from an old.
Oh, he's not.
era
He,
as well.
isn't he? McCree's such a cuck that he changed his name, didn't he?
Oh, is he not McCree? Oh God, this is me showing how much I played Overwatch 2.
No, this isn't your fault. McCree was named, I think, at least partly. Even though there are things out there called like Mad Dog McCree or whatever, I think
Great
McCree was
game.
named. I think I've got to find out for sure, but I want to say McCree was named after someone who worked at Blizzard, and they were one of the people who was naughty, and so they're like, well, we can't call him McCree anymore. But I think he's called Cassidy now.
Ah, okay. Connor in the chat said Jesse. I don't know who Jesse is.
Jesse, oh
I've not
god,
played. See, I played like one game
this
Overwatch 2. This is me just showing.
Yeah, this is a horrible idea. I should not have invoked the
Winston. There you go. He's full. He's going to be a full Chad.
Winston's a proper cuck. He's like
he's a gorilla.
Yeah, bro. But have you not seen a dude who's like physically imposing? But is also like, ooh, playing. I've got to make sure my glasses are on properly. But where do you want to go for dinner? That's fucking Winston.
That's fair enough.
I'm looking through it now. I don't think there is a Jesse.
No, sorry, Connor's saying it's Cassidy.
It's Cassidy, yeah. So Cassidy is what McCree's called now. Honestly, looking through, I'm just going to tell you based on people's faces who I think would pay for dinner and not ask you to split. I think Ash would pay for dinner. I think Baptiste would pay for dinner. Doomfist, Doomfist, you didn't even make it for dinner. He started fucking you before you got out the door.
Doomfist,
yeah.
Do you want the Doomfist?
Junkrat would find a way to get you to pay for it. Like Junkrat would claim he's lost his wallet. Reaper wouldn't show up.
Jesse Cassidy is
Jesse Cassidy
is the name of McCree's name, I think.
I don't know how I feel about that name. Yeah, Winston's a cuck, man. I don't know. That's all I've got to say about that. But the reason we're talking about Overwatch 2 is not just because we wanted to look at all the heroes and profile them based on their faces and talk about whether or not they would pay for dinner on the first date. It's because Overwatch 2 has become the worst rated game on Steam, Jonesy. Can you believe it?
Yeah, like this is kind of crazy, isn't it? It's in one breath, it's like completely irrelevant because we're talking about user reviews. Obviously, it's not critic reviews, but in the other, it's still also kind of shocking about how a game that was held in such high regard, Overwatch 1, can sort of fall so far to the point as that now.
Like, it's one of those things where I totally agree. When you hear the actual numbers, which I'll get to in a second, you realize that this is less indicative of like what a total community think of a game in general. It feels like more of a moment of backlash, an opportunity to have your voice heard, than it does a representation of maybe what's totally going on with Overwatch 2. But it's all happened in the space of just 4 days, and it's actually become the worst rated game on Steam. It has just 0.94% of positive reviews from a total of 113,000 ratings. I mean, less than 1% is pretty shocking. But on the flip side, Jonesy, as I mentioned, in terms of why that might be kind of like a bit of a, not a cry for help, but an opportunity to protest while still playing something that, a game that people are fundamentally invested in. It is still 30th in most played average concurrence with just over 40,000 on Steam. I'm sure there's a world in which Blizzard are disappointed that they just cracked the top 30, given what Overwatch was like at various points in its history, as you mentioned. But at the same time, if 40,000 people are playing your game and less than 1% of the people who have bothered to review it think it's positive, or give it a positive review, then maybe you're doing something right.
Yeah,
On the game, just you're doing another number of things very wrong.
it's that thing that two things can be true at the same time, right? You can absolutely leave a negative review, say that you're disappointed in the way that they've dropped certain elements of the game that they said they were going to have. You can be disappointed that it's not really a sequel and it is more like an add-on. You know, Overwatch 2 is not the sequel that a lot of us wanted. A lot of what they've done does seem kind of like just not enough for a sequel. And then
Yeah.
but then at the same time to go free to play, which should be a good thing. You can see how it's just rubbed a lot of people up the wrong way. It's the whole thing, the whole experience, the whole handling of the fans has been negative. That doesn't actually stop you thinking all of that. Doesn't then stop you saying, "Well, hold on, I'm getting to play the best version of Overwatch 1, which is now Overwatch 2, for free on Steam and still enjoy that, you know, the slick gameplay, how fun that game can be to play. Some of the times that you get, you know, fighting in some of those matches where you just, you know, you can have an amazing time. You can have a fantastic time with Overwatch 2.
Yeah.
That's still true of the game.
Yeah.
So that's what 40,000 people obviously agree because that's the average that they've managed in the last week. So
Totally. Like, you're absolutely right in that sort of like the fundamentals, or most of the fundamentals of what people would consider the core Overwatch experience, are still there and still readily available, and more available than they ever have been before, if you consider the fact that it's free. But you're right that a lot of the decisions made in that free-to-play model have been really poorly received. I remember there was one thing, they've probably corrected this to some degree, but because this was months ago, but there was a charm that you could get. You know how people games had charms that almost like dangle off the side of guns.
yeah,
There was a charm that you could get in Overwatch 2 that, because of the way the currencies worked and what you had to spend to get enough available currency to buy this item in game, it worked out that the digital version of this charm that would hang off your gun was more expensive than a real world, real life version of this charm that you could buy just on like the Blizzard store. Which I feel like when you're getting to that degree, you're in uh, troubled waters. I pulled out some reviews here that have been popping off on Steam lately. One person said, "The people who make Overwatch porn work harder than the people who make Overwatch."
that's great.
Yeah. Another one taps into a lot of what you were saying about kind of people feel like they were being um, uh, believing or buying into promises that Blizzard were unable to keep. They said, quote, "They should make a sequel that includes the whole PvE experience we were promised with skill trees and then call it Overwatch 2. That, as we kind of been hinting at, taps into some of the frustration around the cancelled hero mode, which was going to be a PvE experience, and was, I think, arguably at one point in time, certainly when we were looking at the game prior to release and looking at what Overwatch 2 was going to be, Jonesy, we kept picking that out as like the one thing that was going to make it different or stand apart from Overwatch 1.
Make it a sequel. Like that was what they needed just to make it a sequel.
Very well said. And
Yeah,
then it cancelled it, and now there are smaller PvE missions activities, but those have also been paywalled as a result of, you know, the aforementioned free-to-play model and some of the extensions of it that have not been well received, which is another thing that fans are obviously less than happy about.
I would go so far as to say that if they'd have done something like, if they'd have, instead of calling it Overwatch 2, if they'd have called it Overwatch Definitive, have said it was going free to play and it was going to be going onto Steam, and they never talked about Overwatch 2, and they said we're adding a bunch of new characters, we're adding new maps, new play modes, and we're going to add in some additional payable content. I think you end up with a completely different reaction from the fans. I think you end up with people saying, "Oh wow, that's a great idea! What a good way to reinvigorate Overwatch." But I think because they came out with all these promises, called it Overwatch 2, and then completely flubbed it.
Yeah,
I think that's what's gone on. It's more of like a PR failing to me than you know
I
anything
get
else.
that. Especially because, like, as I kind of hinted at then, you can go back to the very first mentions of the words or the term Overwatch 2 and find people like us and plenty of others who are like, what does that even mean? How do they justify that? Um, and it makes you wonder if they ever really had those answers.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think the fact that they kind of like flubbed their lines on that front, while also, I think, poorly handling the transition to the free to play model and poorly handling, by the sounds of things, lots of other things, not just to do with the way the game is monetized, but with some elements of the way they've rolled out content, the way they've maintained content between the two versions of the game. Like, yeah, it's a weird one. It's a weird one because there is a world out there where you don't know about any of this shit. You don't pay that much attention to stuff. You feel like you want to play Overwatch, so you jump on a PC or a console, you download Overwatch 2 for free, and you just play a game that is very reminiscent, maybe even too reminiscent, but that's a whole other story, of the game that you played 7 years ago and had a good time with. But for the more engaged and expectant and eager Overwatch community, there have been a lot of missteps that make you wonder um, what the future looks like for Overwatch and for Blizzard, especially now, under new ownership. I'd be very interested to see where things go from here. Whether it's just a case of maintaining and hoping to improve Overwatch 2 over time, or whether there are elements in other places that have gone back to the drawing board, or if there are blueprints for something bigger and better in the future that Microsoft enables them to do now with the new parent company. Who could say? Blizzard just still feel like they're in a weird spot though. Like even Diablo 4 felt like it brought them like 1 month of goodwill that was immediately replaced by 1 month of bad, like unhappy people. Once season 1 rolled out.
Yeah, it's a real shame. It's a real shame, like through and through. Like I'm glad people are still playing it, and there's still fun to be had. But yeah, it sucks that what a shit state they're in, and a company like Blizzard, who can make very good games, are in a sort of bit of a sorry state. But I think the worst thing they did, the whole thing, was closing down the servers for Overwatch 1. Was the thing that put the nail in the coffin for ruining the prospects of Overwatch 2, because it was you have to play this game, and then every failing of it was then a sort of a slap in the face. Whereas if they'd have, like I said, if they'd have just said, "Oh, we're migrating to new servers, and it's free to play," and da 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 da. Because I thought it's so hard to imagine the reason they didn't do that was because they wanted people to start again with, like, upgrading characters and getting new stuff and getting cosmetics and all of that. Because I'm guessing none of that carried over because it's a new game.
I'm not sure. I think some of it did.
Okay.
Because I remember the when I first played Overwatch 2, the character or like profile transfer system was like really fucked up, and I was like, "Where's all my stuff?" But I think a lot of that stuff did cross over.
Try to think, because I played it. Did I do that? I played it a couple of times. Now, maybe you're right.
That's
Maybe
the
it
thing.
did. In which case, it's even weirder.
I never played it enough to care. That's
No,
the thing.
me either. I put quite a lot of time into Overwatch 1, but Overwatch 2, I think I
Yeah.
played like maybe 5 or 6 games and I was out.
Totally. Yeah, I think I put two nights on it, and then I was like, okay, that's Overwatch 2.
Yeah, Overwatch 3, mate. It's all going to be fixed. Don't worry.
I can't wait to see what the fucking elevator pitch for that is, and what promises they make, and how inclined people are to believe them. I'll make a promise to you, Jonesy.
Yeah.
And then here's the best part. I'm going to make good on this promise straight away. I promise that the podcast is over now.
Oh, that's a bad promise. I don't want that promise. What do you call a bad promise? A threat.
Yeah, I guess so, yeah. But this is actually, if you think about it, it's a good promise, because here's the thing about the SuperShow podcast. We're 175 episodes deep. And the thing about podcasts is you don't get the new episode unless the old episode ends. So for as much fun as you're having watching or listening to this, for as much fun as you, Jonesy, are having participating in this, the fun we're having has to stop to enable the fun to start up again this time next week in all the same places at all the same times. And that's the promise that we make to the folks at home, that if they liked this, they can tune back in and have just as much fun, if not more so, for episode 176. In the meantime, though, Jonesy, thank you very much for joining me on this wonderful adventure through the past week in video games. You've been great.
Thank you for hosting, doing a fantastic job as always. Thank you to everyone who's joined us as well in the chat. All of you live chatting, and I can see you all live chatting away as we've been talking. So thank you very much.
Very nice. Yeah, shout out to everyone in the chat. And of course, shout out to everyone watching or listening to this after the fact, whether you're doing so on YouTube, whether you're doing so on a podcasting platform. Hello, we hope you enjoyed yourself. And once again, if you feel like heading over to patreon.com/supershow and pledging to help keep this show on the road, then that would be much appreciated and helps guarantee that there will be a next week every week to come. That there's always going to be a goodbye until next week, until the time where we say goodbye and there's not next week and then the podcast is over.
Oh.
Yeah. But that's not this week. That's not this week. That's
another
in
week.
The future. Stay tuned for the end of the Super Show in an as yet unspecified week to come. But until then, thank you for watching and or listening, and we'll see you next time.
Cheers, everyone. See ya.
Bye.